Hello everyone, welcome back to another painting tutorial. In this video I show you how to paint Petrifex Elite. This is how I visualize the Mortek Guards for this sub-faction, so let's get to it. Here's the list of colors which I'm gonna be using for the Mortek Guards. The miniatures are fully assembled except their shields and primed with Baneblade brown. First I'm going to use Nuln Oil wash, and I give an overall wash onto the bone areas. Once the Nuln Oil wash is completely dry, I'm going to use now Agrax Earthshade, and I give a all even wash onto the bone areas. Once the first layer is dry, I'm giving a second wash, and this time I apply it mainly onto the limbs and also onto the torso area and the spine as well. Once it's dry, I'm going to use now Karak stone, and with a small dry brush I start dry brushing the bone areas. Now I'm going to use Zandri dust, and again with a small dry brush I start dry brushing only the head of each Mortek Guard. Then I swap onto a small layer brush and start highlighting all the bone area on the body. Now I'm moving on to Morghast bone, and with a small layer brush I start highlighting the heads, mainly the cheekbone, the brow, the nose, and also the sharpest features of the faces and also the bone areas. And finishing it with Screaming Skull, I base paint all the teeth. For the eyes, first I use white scar as a base paint, and with an extra small layer brush I start base painting all the eyes. And then I apply a small amount of technical Tesseract glow onto the eyes. I also put it just a little bit over the edges to have that nice glowing effect. Now I'm going to focus on the armor. I use Abaddon Black as a base paint. I want my Mortek Guards seen in a lower rank way. The sub faction is known by their crusade for rock-hard fossilized bones, so to give it a match to the armor representing the rock, I decided to give them the armor plates as obsidian or onyx. Now I'm going to use Eshin Grey, and with a small dry brush I start dry brushing only the armor plates. I also base painted with Abaddon Black the shields, and also now I'm going to dry brush them with Eshin Grey. Now I'm going to use Mechanicus Standard Grey, and with a small layer brush I start layering the armor plates one by one, each of them focusing more towards to the sharpest features. I do the same thing for the shields as well. Now I'm going to use Dawnstone, and again with a small layer brush I start highlighting all the sharpest features of the armor plates. As for the shields, I start highlighting the edges of the plates where the pegs can be seen. I also paint some very thin lines randomly on the shields to make the obsidian look more natural, as uneven cracks can be visible on the area. Now I finished the armor with Administratum Grey. As for the Hecatus, I am giving a fine highlight onto the helmet and just a touch on the armor. Now I'm going to base paint all the bone armors using Steel Legion Drab. And I start base painting all the color bone on the chest plate, also the shoulder pads and the sword handles. I also do for the shields as well. After that, I'm going to use Nuln Oil wash, and I'm giving an all even wash on all these Steel Legion Drab painted areas. Once the wash is completely dry, now I'm going to use Baneblade Brown and start layering and highlighting the bone areas. Now I can move on to the cloths, the banner and the shield sigils. I am using Khorne red as a base color for these areas. I am taking my time and being careful around the already painted areas, not to go over. If you prefer the original scheme for the Petrifex Elite, you can use this scheme onto the armor plates. Now I'm going to apply Nuln Oil wash, and I also decided to give one more round of wash onto the bone body in order to make it a bit more darker, more fossilized bone, in my opinion. It turned out so good that I am applying a second layer onto the bones, and with the result I am very satisfied. For me it really gives the visual of the Petrifex Elite rock hard fossilized bone look. Now that the washes are completely dry, I'm going back to use Khorne Red. And with a small dry brush, I start dry brushing the banner. And then I switch to a small layer brush and start layering all the cloth, and also making sure the banner as well is well blended. Now I'm going to use Wazdaka Red, and again with a small layer brush I start layering and highlighting the cloth and also the banner. I also apply a small layer onto the shield sigils. And I'm finishing it with White Rider Red. I apply a fine highlight onto the cloths and the banner. Now I'm going to move on to the gold details and the armor pegs. For this I'm going to use Balthazar Gold as a base paint. On the models I base paint the pegs that are holding the cloths. I base paint the skull symbol on the Hecatus's helmet. On the banner, where the gem is placed, and the symbols as well. And I base paint Hecatus's shield where the gem is. Now I'm going to apply an Agrax Earthshade wash onto the Balthazar gold areas. And finishing it with Retributor armour. I start layering and highlighting the gold areas. On the banner, the little symbols, I cover them with this gold paint. And on the armors and the shields, I base paint the pegs as well. For the next step, I'm using Incubi Darkness as a base color, and I start base painting the gems, the swords, and the straps for the banner. Now I'm going to apply Nuln Oil wash onto the Incubi Darkness areas, except these swords. Once the wash is completely dry, I am using Kabbalite green. On the swords, I use a small dry brush and start dry brushing mainly from the top area. I also dry brush very gently the banner straps too. Now I'm moving on to Cyberite green. On the blades first I use a small dry brush and still give a nice dry brush mainly on the tip of each blade to have a nice transition. After that I am moving on to use a small layer brush and start highlighting each blade. After the blades, I'm moving on to the gems and start to give a fine highlight onto each gems. And I also start highlighting the straps on the banner. Now as a finishing touch, I'm gonna use Fenrisian Grey, and I apply an extra fine highlight onto the blades. And I also give a fine highlight onto the gems. And now I'm going to seal the gems with art coat. I want to give a nice shining look to the gems. So I just start covering each of the gems. The first color I'm going to use is dried bark, and I start base painting the inside of the shield. Following it with lead belcher. I also base paint all the holders. Now I'm going to apply Nuln Oil wash onto the lead belcher and dried bark area. Once the wash is completely dry, I use Gorthor Brown, and with a small old brush, I start dry brushing all the wooden parts. And with Stormhost Silver, I start highlighting with a small layer brush all the metallic parts. Now some shields have some teeth, so I'm gonna start base painting them with Dawnstone. After that, I apply Agrax Earthshade onto the Dawnstone areas. and just give an edge highlight with Administratum Grey. I received many questions about how to remove the painted parts from sprues and how to glue the parts together, so here is a footage where I show you how to do this in an easy, efficient way. Before I paint them on sprues, I make sure that there aren't any mold lines on the parts. After it is painted, I remove the shields from the sprues, either twisting it, if there are only two joints holding the parts on the sprue. If multiple, then with a sprue cutter I cut them off. I am using a cutter and cut off the extra joint parts. Once it is clean, then I apply the base color, which I used for the parts, in this case Steelage and Drab. And I apply it mainly to the parts where the plastic is visible. I also go over just a little bit to have a nice transition with the painted areas. Once it is done, then I use super glue and I apply a very little amount onto the joint areas, because super glue, once it's dry, it becomes a solid white gooey, which can be visible in certain areas. I give a firm hold with the parts around 5 seconds and it is done. I have my Hecatos fully assembled. Here is another footage where the sprue is connected on some other way onto the parts. I do the same thing by removing it from the sprue. I cut off the excess parts with a sharp blade. And I use the base color, which part was base painted earlier, in this case with Abaddon black. And here are my finished Petrifex Elite Mortek Guards. I did a lot of research, however I couldn't find anything based on the Mortek Guards. I decided to give the idea that they belong to a low rank, and therefore I choose this alternate scheme for them. Now, if you prefer to have your Mortek Guards painted in the original scheme, you can follow these color choices, but just changing the areas, such as the red painted onto the armor plates, the shield bone teeth to the bone armors, and the cloths painted in the banner straps way. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, do subscribe to my channel, leave a like if you found the video useful or helpful, and hit the bell button if you want to be notified about future video tutorial contents. Also, you can share the video with your friends who might be interested about these tutorials. Thanks for watching. See you all in the next one. Cheers.